Let me go ahead. Yeah, I really enjoyed your podcast with Zimmerman and your ability to kind of share your wisdom. It's obvious that you've been doing this for years. And what I found with those that have been in their field for years and years, they just really have the ability to kind of go where the conversation takes them. And I would love to take that approach and just kind of go back and forth and ask questions. And there were a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. One of them was the play and the connection to the background that you have there. The other one was your 7 myths, or, just some of the common myths about men's sexual abuse and the history and, vampire syndrome and any context for people to move forward if they find themselves kind of, having light bulb moments like I did when I listened to you. And if you don't mind, I wanted to share my experience just so that I can kind of give you how that had an effect on me, even though I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee, and you're on the West Coast. I've been in the sexual health education and coaching field for almost 18 years. And my husband and I have been married for 17. And for the majority of that time, there was a lot of struggle trying to figure out what was missing. There wasn't very much connection. And I felt like a fraud trying to help other people with their relationship. And so as I started digging, he kind of would have these spirals of depression and was more hyposexual, so I was the one that was trying to pursue, intimacy with him. And it was just a very difficult thing for him to engage in. And so when I came across your podcast, it was just like, oh my goodness, so many light bulb moments. And this was after reading books and listening to podcasts and hearing a ton of stuff on women and their experience, which is so important. I think all stories are important, but it just really gave us the conversation starter, the validation. My husband listened to the podcast then, and he was just good. Yes, and we got some of the books that you encouraged us to get. And I also watched you on a webinar. So I just kind of really submerge ourselves, and he was able to take the information that you gave to his therapist. So there were so many seeds that this was last year. So this is over the course of 1 year. We just celebrated a year of recommitting to each other and really finding that deep connection and that spiritual sexuality, and that, he's really found the element of play and joy and fulfillment. So I wanted to thank you for doing that. And
you're welcome.
I didn't realize I was going to get emotional, but when you said that you were going to be able to share some information with my listeners, I was just like, it was like, celebrity moment, like, oh my gosh, I kept calling you Dr. Braveman. And, and finally Wanda said, it's actually just Stephen. You can call him Stephen. So thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Well, I'll clarify that. A lot of people do call me Dr. Braveman, and there's a couple of reasons for it. One is, no matter what I tell people, what my degrees and credentials are, they say, well, I don't care, you're my doctor. Okay. But there is a drop of truth to it too, is that I have an honorary doctorate from the Universalist Church in theology when we paid the money so I could get certified to marry people. So
okay, good. Well,
I have an honorary doctorate. I've been offered my doctorate through legitimate institutions before, recognizing my experience in the field and saying, look, we can make it so you skip this, skip that, and just write up about what you're doing or something, and we'll give you your doctorate. It's like, no, if I'm gonna get a doctorate, I want to earn it, and I want to earn it properly. And then all of a sudden one comes in the mail, it's honorary. So it's kind of, but yeah, you can call me whatever you want. That's okay. Stephen is good. Mr. Braveman is good. And again, some people call me Dr. Braveman, as long as I clarify what that means technically.
Thank you.
That's okay. Let me go back, if I may, because I get this. This is organic between you and I today. And you mentioned about your husband and the difficulties that you've had with him. Did you find that when you first met him, your sexual connection was okay? And that around 2 years into it is when all of a sudden he started to shut down?
To almost to the date. And
Yeah.
we tracked that back in your hearing the information that you delivered. And there was so much of it that was relatable, that, and also, it was a babysitter that took advantage of him for over the course of a decade. And so that piece of still feeling more comfortable around women. And instead of taking that hypersexual route, he took hyposexual. So yeah, lots of similarities.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about play, and you're interested in this. Let me tell you a little story about it. When I started the men's group, and I think I might have mentioned this in one or two of the things you might have picked up on, is I was looking for a way to get the men to bond. And my office and my home were very close to surrounded by military bases and a high school. And I heard military people march by and chant their marches. And I heard the high school kids, go, oh God, Broncos, or I forget what the name of it is, and I thought, I got an idea, because I stumbled upon a one-page story called Lessons from Geese. And it really struck me, that's what we're doing here, is that we're having them take turns because it's easier to rotate around. It helps build a bond. We are honking for each other because that's what geese do to encourage each other. There were so many things in there. So I started this idea, well, we have to have our own chant. And I said, okay, guys, let's do this. We're like the geese, let's honk. And I taught them to literally, we do this usually every time, if not more than once, as we go honk, 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 honk. And somebody tries to go longer than somebody else. And it's one of the most embarrassing, difficult things the guys do when they first come into the group. And then one of the most meaningful things. So that, and the fact that we made a documentary called Boyhood Shadows, all about guys who were sexually abused as children, and the fact that I happen to have therapy dogs, psychiatric service animal dogs, and at the time I had in particular a beagle who would come honk with my men's group because he came to work with me, and we'd get up, we'd hold hands, and we'd go honk, honk, and he'd get in the middle of the circle. He loved it, and he would honk with us. So one of the men who graduated the group decided to gift the group this thing, and he had this custom made where you see the geese, you see the boy, you see the dog, and I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but down at the bottom it says honk, honk, honk.
I see it.
So the lessons from geese, the honking, this is the like the heart and soul of this, and it does bring up play, because we have to play. Now, we have very serious, it's the way I run the group is it's very much psychoeducational, and it's very psychologically based. I mean, it's a therapy group, but we have to teach. And one of the things we have to teach is play. Most of the guys, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, don't know how to play because they've carried this heavy burden. And quite often they start carrying it when they were young, and they stopped playing. They didn't want to play with peers after having this happen to them or that happen, after being sexual with an adult. Who can find pleasure being on the playground playing hopscotch or something like that? So they've shut down the play. So we do need to teach them play. We need to teach them a lot of the things that they've lost along the way by not being able to develop in a what most people call a normative or an average way.
Yeah, you say their childhood is arrested at the time that they were molested, right?
Yes, developmentally arrested
Yeah.
at that stage. And I point out, well, yeah, sure, you get older, the whiskers grow, the hair falls out, yeah,
Mhm.
you age, and there's certain parts that mature, but psychosocial sexual development is really arrested right at that point.
Mm.
So in your husband's case, if he can pinpoint, well, when did the molestation start? Quite often, the healing process starts the moment the abuse ends, true, but
Mhm.
the deliberate, conscious healing process of moving forward again picks up at that moment. Where
Mhm.
was he? Was he a 6-year-old? Okay, now you got a 6-year-old essentially in a 30, 40-year-old body.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
time to learn how to socialize appropriately, time to have learned sexual boundaries appropriately, time to learn, like with the guys, masturbation becomes a big issue.
Mhm.
Very typical. Guys like your husband might shut down sexually with his beautiful, wonderful wife, but masturbate a lot, looking at porn, or act out sexually in some way, shape, or form, or shut it down completely.
Right.
But the balance, where do you find the balance between trust, love, sex, and boundaries? Ooh, that's a tough one. So
Yeah.
play is definitely important. Yeah.
We found that it has helped our heart space open more through play, and building that trust back has been crucial as well. And, when finding out about your men's groups, it was during COVID, and trying to find some type of connection that he could have with other men. It was like, okay, where can we find that? And he's actually been a part of a group of a friend of ours that has a group called Manifestation. And they,
Ah,
it's kind of a conscious bro situation where
mhm,
they play, they have fun, but they also talk a lot about emotional regulation and communication with your partner. It's a really beautiful group of people. And then, talking about masculine energy and what it looks like to be a masculine, like warrior king, that kind of take on it, as opposed to looking at what society has described as what masculine looks like. So that's
mhm,
been super helpful. And I forgot to mention that another part of my emotional, how powerful it is for me, is noticing not only my husband going through this, but friends of ours,
mhm,
and bringing this conversation up and saying, well, this is more common than we think. It's 1 in 6, right? One in
mhm,
6 men were
mhm.
sexually abused as boys
It's a
or
professional
molested.
guesstimate based
Yeah.
upon all the research we can find. We
Mhm.
don't really know because, like women, the vast majority of men will never say something. They
Right.
won't speak up. And then we get into, the myths about male sexual abuse, which guys learn and other people hear and place on the victim that keeps them from coming forward. For
Mhm.
example, one of the most important parts is guys typically don't. If you ask a guy, were you molested as a kid? They'll almost always say no. If
Mhm.
you say, was anybody sexual with you in a way that now you think maybe was kind of questionable at the time? Oh, yeah. Okay. And then they'll go on and they'll describe. And most of the time, they don't think of it as abuse if they weren't violently, anally raped.
Mhm.
And the vast majority of child molestation has nothing to do with violence. It is considered an aggressive act, yes, but most of the time kids are groomed that way, that to go along with it, they're bribed. Lots of times, whatever the price to pay that they have to pay to go over to a neighbor's house is better than staying at home.
Mhm.
Like, geez, lots of times I hear guys say, I kept going back there. I knew what was going to happen, but they had food, they had video games that we could do what we want. Their father gave us pot or something, got us high.
Mhm.
And at home we were starving. My dad was or naps and mom was or this. Yeah. So they make it in lots of ways a good thing to the child. So the child doesn't register it as abuse. Also, of course, if they're gay, then they wonder, well, maybe it was okay because, well, I was gay and he just helped me realize it. At 6, no, at 8 years old? No, that's not okay. Babysitters quite often abuse in ways that kids don't even register, because babysitters quite often will do it when the child is asleep or during bath time, where it's like, well, I guess this is okay. I mean, I'm getting a bath. They're supposed to touch me.
Right.
So lots of ways they just don't register it. Back to the question about the numbers. So it's our best guess that we say about 18%. 1 out of 6 is about 18% of guys will be sexually abused in some way, shape, or form by the time they reach 18. That doesn't take into account possible rape as an adult, or sexual assault while going on autopilot. What I mean by that is, like, I've heard this from several people where they have had somebody present sexually to them and they didn't want it, they weren't into it, but their body just kind of like froze. Their mind is going, oh my God, what am I going to do here? And they go on autopilot, meaning they just go along with it because they can't seem to break free of them. It's like, I got to get out of this. And they can't get beyond that boundary and stand up for themselves and say what they need to say, do what they need to do at the time. So a sexual assault winds up occurring. It's not uncommon in a case like you and your husband, where maybe you think, hey, we're married. I love this guy. Guys like sex. He's not initiating, so I'll initiate. And he may feel like he's frozen. He can't say no because, well, my wife wants to have sex. Okay, I'm a guy. I'm supposed to go along with it. And might be experiencing triggers of, oh, I'm being molested all over again. I can't say no. I couldn't say no then. I can't say no now.
Right. That fight, flight, or freeze comes into play. And I know disassociation was something that I hear come up often. And, back to your conversation about like people that you trust, the difference between a pedophile and a child molester. Can you touch on that and what that looks like and how it might show up?
That's a very common thing that people get a little confused on. What is the difference? Are all pedophiles child molesters? No, probably 98% of them are. Otherwise, how would we ever find out that they're a pedophile? But there are pedophiles who don't actually act upon their urges. What nowadays lots of times people are calling minor attracted person. So I admit it, I'm attracted to minors, but I don't act upon it. Okay, well, sometimes people do. Where the boundary is between the two is anybody can commit an act of child molestation. You or I could do it. Now, how could I do it? I've thought of this. What would it take me to molest a child? Probably being kidnapped by Al-Qaeda terrorists, tortured, drugged, brainwashed, with a gun to my head. Okay, I guess I probably could do it. Otherwise, I don't know how I could do it. Okay? But people who might get drunk, who otherwise they wouldn't do something, may find themselves, oops, all of a sudden they committed an act of child molestation. That's not the pedophile. The pedophile basically lives and breathes to molest children. Pedophiles quite often consider children their sexual orientation. And that's highly debatable. Should we buy into that? Should we call it an orientation or not? Because if we call it an orientation, we're kind of giving it legitimacy, and we don't want to do that. Doesn't matter who you're attracted to or what you're attracted to. We feel that you should still have the ability to choose whether you're going to act on those things or not. So, given the choice, most child molesters would rather have a sexual relationship with somebody their own age or the appropriate age group and have it be loving kind. But this is not where they're at the moment. Lots of times they can't find a lover. Lots of times they're fighting with their lover. Something goes wrong and they have access to a child and they act out. In the case of a babysitter, babysitters quite often don't see themselves as child molesters. They see themselves as, curious. I've never touched that.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
child's asleep or I'm bathing him. Nobody's going to know. It's not going to harm anything. But then they grow up to be orientated towards other adults, other people their own age. Those are child molesters. Pedophile, no, they're not interested in sex with adults. They're only interested in sex with children. To the extreme is the group called NAMBLA, which feels that their motto is, and their belief is, sex by 8 is too late. And they believe it is their obligation, and we should all be obligated to initiate children into sexual activity as early as possible. And that why you and I haven't done it is we're not as evolved as they are, because they're evolved enough to realize that this is what we're supposed to be doing. That's a serious pedophile.
That is horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the average, too, when we catch them, career pedophiles, on the average, have molested at least 117 children.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. The average child molester might molest 1, 2, 3 kids. Quite often it's the younger cousin, or it's their son or their daughter, or their neighbor's friend or something like that. And not to diminish it for the victim, that's just as bad as anybody else or anything else.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a minor little thing where otherwise they're carrying on a marriage, an adult relationship, something we deem appropriate. So that's the big difference. Another one too is treatment. So I do work a lot with sex offenders as well. And in our work with sex offenders, we see that child molestation is something we can quite often treat. If we catch somebody and they've committed a act or a few acts of child molestation, and there's no other big major red flags, we can possibly have a positive outcome. A career pedophile, especially like the one in our documentary, James Lamb, who was convicted of molesting over 75 boys. And that's 1 count per child, even though we're sure he acted on it a lot more than that. Somebody like this, the rate of success is extremely poor. So it's very diagnostic to decide, is this a child molestation case or is this a pedophilia case?
I imagine that both the molester and then the victim carry a lot of shame. Is that true? Like in your experience?
Well, pedophiles typically don't carry shame. Quite often they think that they're doing the right thing. This is okay. Or they're just so out of touch with reality, commonly defined reality. They don't get it. Shame is not an issue for them. Somebody who commits a relatively minor act of child molestation, meaning let's say they molested their cousin for 3 years on a weekly basis, which of course isn't really minor.
Right. I was like, that is relative. Right.
Yeah, it's relevant. Somebody like that quite often won't carry any shame. A lot of times people say, well, it happened to me, so, it's no big deal. This is what we do in our culture. And there's no real shame. Unfortunately, the guilt and shame, unfounded, is placed on the victim. So you come to my men's group or my women's group. I also have a women's group on during the week. Same basic thing: women who have been molested as children, or date raped or gang raped or something like that as an adult. You don't hear as much about the women's group because it's not rare, but the men's group is rare. So you come sit in on one of the groups and you watch these people struggle to heal, struggle dealing with the guilt and shame they feel. And I ask them, do you think the person who molested you is sitting in a therapy group right now working on their guilt or shame?
No.
Yeah, it's pretty much unheard of. So the guilt and shame is really placed on. A lot of the people I work with have been molested by priests. Quite often they do what educators might do and go, look, I'm an outstanding person. You're going to believe me over them. Priests quite often say, look, I'm next to God. And
Mhm.
people go, oh, you can't believe that child. You're
Right.
accusing a priest. I mean, priests are holy. They wouldn't do anything like that. Thank God, pun intended, most priests are good people and are
Mhm.
not pedophiles.
Right.
But a lot of them are molested by priests, and that's placed on them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That and coaches or
Coaches,
mentors,
absolutely, coaches,
teachers.
and that's been big.
Yeah.
Um, all kinds of people of authority, Boy Scout leaders,
Mhm.
you know, kid, yo, let's go on a camp out. Okay, my dad's gonna take us. He's the scout leader, and he
Right.
takes all the kids and takes them into his tent and molests them. Again, most guys don't.
Mhm.
Most people don't molest kids. Most people are not pedophiles.
Mm.
That's why it's shock and awe when we hear about it.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
is more rampant than we think. And when
Mhm.
somebody in authority does it, it's very painful, very hard. I've got a guy in my group right now who fits into this category where he was molested by a female school teacher.
Mhm.
And at the time in high school, he thought he was lucky.
Mhm.
His male friends thought he was lucky. It's like, hey, wow, you get to do Miss So and so.
Mhm.
The girls who found out thought it was creepy and weird and wanted nothing to do with him.
Mhm.
When the teacher got arrested, then it started to cave in on him. Oh my God, I was a victim.
Mhm.
How do you take that on when you don't think that? Little kids must depend on their parents for survival, or guardians, whoever's. How could you see them as molesters? How could you see as what they're doing is wrong? If it feels wrong, a child must decide somehow, well, I guess I deserved it.
Right.
Or it's not wrong because everybody does this.
Right. Especially if it's being celebrated. And that's what had happened with my husband as well, was, the older woman situation where his friends were like, all right. And he was like, that was cool. Okay. And there was so much confusion with body non-concordance, with his,
Mm-hmm,
him feeling not in his body, not able to be present in the moment, just kind of going along with it. But his body was like, okay, I guess this is what we're supposed to do.
mm-hmm,
And I know that's a myth, is that how can men be sexually abused, or how can they actually
mm-hmm,
perform intercourse, if how can they be raped, or how can they be
mm-hmm,
abused? And that's a thing, right? Where your body is just like, okay, this is the thing that we do, this is what we were made to do, so let's
mm-hmm,
go along with this, even though your brain is having a hard time processing what's going on, and to verbalize that you don't feel safe and you don't feel comfortable.
mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Of course, a lot of times, again, kids think that this is okay because the child molester or pedophile made it somehow okay.
Mm-hmm.
However, boys' bodies will respond. You touch a penis, it tends to get hard.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if your penis is rubbed or sucked or something long enough, prostate tends to kick in and there's an ejaculation.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they enjoyed it, though, even if they thought they were a willing partner, they weren't.
Right.
We really believe that children are not mature enough, they don't have enough knowledge to give consent. And so that's why we say they were the victim in
Mm-hmm.
that case.
Yeah.
But absolutely, again, if they think, how can you molest a child? Well, a man could molest a child because he's got a penis. How could a woman molest a child, especially a boy? There's a lot of things you can do sexually to a person shy of having intercourse with them. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to use a penis to penetrate somebody to
Right.
molest.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you cover a few of the myths? And then I would love to also talk about, so covering a few myths, and then how this shows up and why it's important that we're having these conversations and hearing the
Mhm.
stories, and then closing it out with what we can do to support our kids, our partners.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the myths that we usually talk about, there's other ones too, but these are the most common ones.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is called the macho image. So guys are taught from the time they're little boys that men are tough, to be strong, that you should be able to protect yourself. I talk to little kids in like elementary school class about this. I say, boys can be molested too. Hand goes up. Mr. Braveman, yes. Couldn't happen to me. Oh, really? Why? Well, if somebody touched me like that, I'd give them a karate chop. Do you know karate? No, of course they don't. And of course, little kids are quite often molested by big adults. There's no way a child can protect himself. But that image is, well, I'm a man, so it couldn't happen.
Right.
Another part of that macho thing is that if they were molested, don't admit it. Don't tell anybody. Tough it out. Man up and get through it on your own. You don't need help. Going to therapy is a weakness. Talking to somebody is a weakness. That's one of them. Another one is that if they were molested by a man, they must have been effeminate in some way. One thing about this is people falsely believe if a man molests a boy, then that man is gay. Gay men molest children at an extremely low rate, much lower rate than heteronormative or what most people call straight men do. It's not about the sexual orientation. While pedophiles and child molesters do sometimes have preferences, it's usually about access and power and control. So it doesn't mean that the boy was effeminate whatsoever. It means he was a victim. He was picked. It was somehow that he was easy prey because he was available to them. Also, even if he was effeminate, so that doesn't mean anything. At our rape crisis centers across the country, we have posters of like a prostitute wearing almost nothing out on the street and an arrow pointing to her genitals that say, this is not an invitation for rape. Being effeminate doesn't make a boy gay, nor does it make him straight, and it doesn't make him easy target. Another part of it is if a boy is molested by a male, he will become gay. We can't make somebody gay. We can't make somebody bisexual. We can't make anybody heteronormative. We just can't do that. Now people go, yeah, but what about places like the Seaman Warriors of New Guinea? There's a good question. Here was a whole warrior culture where the boys were taken away from the women at an early age. They're raised by the men to be proud warriors, and to transmit the warrior strength, the men ejaculate in the boys' mouths, and the boys swallow the semen to get that strength. Does that mean everybody in that culture was gay? No, it just means it's a cultural blip. It's something, ooh, that's different. Okay? But it didn't mean they were gay. We can't make people gay, even though we can make them have sex with a same gender or a different gendered person. Another myth is, what about you can't be molested by a female if you're a boy? Really? Why not? Well, again, because women are strong, men are stronger than women, bigger and stronger. Really? The average 5-year-old is bigger and stronger than his mother or grandmother or female teacher or somebody. And again, as we just spoke about it, well, how do you molest? If you have the saying is, if you have a tongue, you can have sex. If you're quadriplegic, nothing works except your tongue. You can be a great lover. There's lots of ways to have sex. The most damaging myth of all is what we call the vampire syndrome. This is the one that is where people are told, once bitten, you will go on to bite, like the victims of Count Dracula. When they're bitten, they become vampires and they're going to do it to others. Several reasons why this is the most damaging. First thing, it's not true. The vast majority of victims never, ever touch a child, never molest, never rape. Why? Partly because they understand the pain of it. They know how bad this can be. Why would they want to do what was horrendous to them? Why would they want to do this to somebody else? But they do hear this myth. And so part of it is lots of guys who love children choose not to partner up with somebody and have kids. Don't become a parent. because you're going to molest your kids. Who told you that? Well, I heard that. Where'd you hear it? It even appears sometimes in psychology books in college classes that child molesters, do this and they pass it on. Another part is, let's say, for example, back to you and your husband, that if you had found out that your husband was molested before you got married, if you did not know any better, you might very well decide, well, I can't marry him. Why? He'll molest our kids. Who told you that? Well, that's, we know that people were molested. I mean, it happened to Michael Jackson, which is a big myth. And that's what drove us to make our Boyhood Shadows documentary, incidentally, is that Michael Jackson was, we were told in the newspapers, he was sexually abused as a child. That's what made him a pedophile. And it's like, no, 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 no. Sexual abuse does not make people pedophiles. So this is very, very damaging myth and the hardest one.
Mm-hmm.
In our work, of course, we have to challenge all these myths. We have to help these guys look at the truths and get past it. And it's not good enough just to tell them. Like right now, I'm telling you this, not for the first time that you're hearing it, but if it was, okay, you can go, all right, that doesn't change behavior though. So we have to really work on this stuff. Unfortunately, a victim doesn't live in a bubble or under a rock, even though sometimes they may feel like they do,
Mm-hmm.
and it impacts others. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, they may not choose to have children or work with children or get married or something like that because they're afraid what they may do.
Mm-hmm.
But also in a couple situation, it's extremely typical for a male survivor to meet somebody new and be okay sexually at first. Why? Because there's no trust built yet.
Mm-hmm.
This is just raw sexual attraction. Okay. And they can get an erection. They can, as sometimes people like to call it, perform.
Mm-hmm.
But as the trust builds in the relationship, the bond of trust, it's usually reminiscent of what happened to them as a child, because most kids are molested by people they know and supposedly they can trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so the sex gets weird and they start shutting it down.
Mm-hmm.
That's why a progression that I recommend is that when somebody presents that, okay, they've been molested, this has happened, is let's get some individual therapy in, help them get some grounding. Quite often, if we have to get them on medication or off medication, help them find their footing enough to then maybe come into the group. And in the group, do a lot of this work. Unfortunately, though, in group, while the average guy comes into my group is there for about 1.5 to 2 years, I'm the first one to notice progress after about 3 to 4 months. Then the other group members start to notice progress in the guy after about 6 to 9 months. The guy's partner, if he has one, doesn't notice any progress for about 1.5 to 2 years. What about me? There's a book out there that I hope the person finished writing it. Somebody approached me years ago and said, well, there's all this help you provide for the victims, but what about me? What about my needs? I didn't do anything wrong, and I feel like I'm being punished by what happened to my partner. That's true. In couple situations, the partner is victimized by the victimization.
Mm-hmm.
And it's essential to break the patterns that most people develop is me against you, I want you, I don't want them. And they battle over sex and intimacy and all, and join forces and come together and work together as a team to overcome it.
Yeah.
That's why I recommend a few things to couples. One is 2 books that I believe you picked up on. One is Allies in Healing by Laura Davis. Another one is Outgrowing the Pain Together by Eliana Gill. These are not new books, but they're outstanding books for couples on what do you need to do as a couple to get past this. Then there's a final piece that has to happen, and that is if you build the bonds of trust, you put the blame where the blame belongs, you get all that good. What about a sexual healing? people quite often miss that if you've been sexually abused, you need to have a sexual healing.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that look like? That usually looks like having a safe, consensual, appropriate, satisfying sexual relationship with your partner. Typically, that's how that looks. To get there, I teach tantric workshops for people who've been sexually abused. Tantra meaning bringing the sacred, the special, the safety, the this is good to the sexual relationship. Another source I recommend is Stacey Haynes' book called Healing Sex. She also has a video. I understand the video is hard to find these days. Some of these books, you have to ask Amazon print on demand. But to get this and take it the full distance. If you're the partner of a person who's been sexually abused, you need some patience. You need to realize that just because it blows it up in everybody's face and okay, the truth is out, let's work on it. Change in the relationship isn't going to come easy, and it's not going to come fast.
No.
Quite often for the victims, I see them that they work so hard, and finally they become the person that they wish they were, that their partner wished they were, but it's too late for their partner. They couldn't take it, and they've ended the relationship. So it's not easy. If they come together, though, we increase the chances of success tremendously.
That is heartbreaking to hear, because I think about, who it's almost like we've had to chisel the hard shell of frustration and, helping my husband feel safe in his body. And I say help, he did all the work, and he's worked so hard to regulate his emotions and notice when things feel, dysregulated, and and doing tantra stuff. So I'm glad you pointed that out. But I think the minute that I, from the perspective of the support partner, the times where I was so frustrated, I just kept thinking, I've got more work to do on myself. And so I would take that attention and that codependency and just verbally say, I'm going to work on myself for a little bit. And there were times where I would say, I just want to press pause on our sex life right now. I love you. I have compassion for you, but I want to be the best that I can be for us and for our kids. And so by doing this, I'm just going to feel stuff out a little bit and, have some time with myself and figure things out. And by doing that, it gave him the space to continue his healing process. So it doesn't have to be like, you can be supporting each other from your own seats. You don't have to be sitting in the same seat and trying to do this together the entire time. And I think reading those books is super helpful. And, being able to highlight some things and ask your partner. And that's what I did with the podcast that I originally heard you in was, are you open to hearing this podcast? So there were a lot of things that set off some light bulbs, and I can't believe how, parallel some of these stories are that he told about survivors or victims, of sexual abuse. And by asking for permission, if he said he wasn't ready, I wouldn't hold it against him, but just being able to ask if they're open to certain things is helpful too. And I love all of those myths because it completely takes it out of, what we thought, and just starting that conversation. And I've tried to talk to a few people about this. And, I had one friend that just kind of said, oh, we were born in the 70s. That's just what happened. We knew what coach not to get a ride home with. And it was like, that's not okay. And that's why I feel like there's this, when depression started to show up in my husband and other friends and their partners, and kind of putting all of the connections together, it's like, what was the root cause of the depression? It may not have been sexual abuse, but there were some common threads with another friend who ended up in a spiral of addiction. And it's just like having this information out there is so valuable. And I'm just thankful for all this information that you're providing so that maybe we can talk about it some more.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I'd like to, if I can keep you for a minute longer,
Sure. Yeah.
throw in a couple more things that you just touched on. One is that sexual abuse survivors, whether they be male, female, or they, are frequently misdiagnosed as having a bipolar disorder. Why? The symptoms of abuse look so much like that. And it's so difficult to speak to people. Quite often, a psychiatrist will see a patient who looks depressed, been cutting, disassociated, and they'll won't ask, oh, did somebody ever touch you when you were a kid in the wrong way? And so they get put on medications and they get sold down the mental health river. Now, that doesn't mean that all sexual abuse survivors are immune from having bipolar disorders. No, some people really do. But we have to be careful to look at this and see, where is this really coming from? And we have to be careful also along the way to educate others that just because your husband presents with depression, anxiety, sexual shutting down, poor self-esteem, doesn't mean it's your fault. Doesn't mean he doesn't want to get better. Alcohol, drugs are really good for numbing out for a while, but eventually it's going to cave it back in on them. Eventually they have to deal with it. And hopefully, eventually they turn that around and have the perpetrator pay the piper. To put it back, even if the perpetrator is dead, or even if you don't know who the perpetrator was, there are ways to confront, and confronting is vital. So you said, well, at first, well, I helped him, but I tried to help him. Well, I didn't help him. He did all the work. I'll disagree politely about that. If you stay with your partner when you find out that your partner's been abused and you work on it together, you're both co-creating something better. You're both co-creating healing. It's not just the victim, survivor. It's not just the partner. It's the combination. That's why it's so vital if we can help people stay with their partners and find the healing within the relationship.
Right.
That's vital. But of course, it has to be matched with healing within.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And, you say staying with your partner when things like that show up. What about those that have the hypersexual route where they find out the partner's been cheating, and our society has, from my experience, has taken a stance on cheating as the end all be all of every single relationship. And I've had a change of heart when, infidelity comes into play, because I feel like that's a red flag of why did you choose that route, and how much I just have compassion for the cheater too, which is surprising based on where I started in my marriage of being like, if you ever,
Yeah. Well, one thing about when people cheat, are they cheating? That's up to definition and the fidelity agreements people make. A lot of times people think if somebody's masturbating, they're cheating. So is that not? But I think you're talking about going off and having a sexual encounter with at least one other person outside the relationship. Not to excuse it, not to give permission to it, but what I find is frequently somebody will come in my door and they'll tell me they're in trouble. What happened? Well, my partner found out that I was having an affair, or seeing prostitutes, something. They kicked me out. Oh, okay. I need some help. Okay, well, let's take a look. And if I find that the person has been sexually abused and hasn't worked on it, I say, will you see if your partner will come in just one time and let's talk about this? And if I explain what the symptoms are of sexual abuse and I spell out a treatment plan, okay, this is how we progress through individual and group and couples and all, and that this is how long it takes, I find quite often people go, oh, they're mad, they're hurt, not because they don't care, but they love this person.
Mm-hmm.
And if they find, oh, there's a reason for their behavior, and oh, there is possible help, and we can maybe get better and work this through, quite often they choose that.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody says, I just can't take it, I just know that's my boundary, I'll respect that as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know we just have a few minutes left, and I want to end on a positive note, if we can, of how we can take action. And I'm raising two boys. I've got a lot of friends with kids that aren't getting great sex ed here in Tennessee. How can we support our kids and, actively give them good conversations, have good conversations with them to keep them safe without
Just starting that question is very helpful, because what I've seen in my career is that people are concerned about molestation and rape and things like the Me Too movement and all, when there's not something else dominating the news. But all of a sudden there's stolen elections, or there's a war in Ukraine, or there's an epidemic, and this all gets set aside and people forget about it. So bringing up the questions, remembering that there's people who are being victimized, and we can maybe do something to stop it. We can maybe do something to heal it. That under any condition, that's really helpful. Now, what about kids? One of the things I love to share with parents and teachers to share with kids is a song by Peter Alsop. Peter Alsop is a friend, colleague of mine, who was an educational psychologist turned musician, songwriter. He has stuff for kids, for adults, but most of it is for kids, and most of it is therapeutic in nature. So he has a song on one CD called "I'm Bored." Bored. What are we going to do today? I'm bored. Well, how do you deal with it? Another one is for Christmas. All I want for Christmas is for mommy to stop smoking. Oh, okay. Another one is called a wee wee song. It's only a wee wee. It's all about urinating and having a urethra, and everybody's got one. What's the big deal? Another one, though, that's very vital is called My Body. My Body, it's kind of a long song. And so I warn people about that. I've used this a lot in my work. It is a fun song with a serious message aimed at young kids as a sing-along, where you hear kids and the adult too in the song back and forth, talking about my body's my body to have and to hold, and basically messages: I got my body, it's mine. You leave my body alone. I'll leave your body alone. There's good times, there's right times, like if you have to see a doctor or something, okay? There's touch, there's good touch, there's not good touch. And we, at the end, the kids all singing, our bodies are our bodies, and we're strong. And take some action, any kind of action. If you were abused, or if your partner was abused, if you're close to somebody who was abused, whether they be your partner or not, and you don't want to tell the kids about that, your personal experience, okay, but tell them something. Educate them about safe touch, not safe touch. Educate them about who to turn to if there's troubles, if something doesn't feel right. Give them a message. If you're a victim, or you are going through this with a victim survivor, if you can role model how to get better when bad things happen, that's really good. But to teach kids sex education, to teach them about rape prevention, molestation prevention, what to do, doesn't have to be a heavy, serious subject. It's a serious subject that can be made fun. So I urge that. In my couples work, I do that too. I lead people through fun exercises where we learn, teach them how to stand up and actually look at each other and talk about, oh, I can't look at that body part of this. Okay, let's work through that stuff. Let's learn how to play. If two people can let their little children come out and play in between the serious stuff, great. That's one of our goals. Again, that's why we end usually our group with honk, 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 honk. big smiles. I tell them, make the tips of your lips meet your earlobes. Big smiles. And I also teach clown school 101 to help people lighten up and let it out and do some laughter therapy.
Oh, I love
Topics
that.
for another time.
Yes, so heart opening. I really appreciate it. I love that we're closing out with what we started with as well. So thank you so much, Mr. Braveman. No, Mr.
You're welcome.
Braveman, Dr.
Brave
Braveman,
man.
Stephen. I appreciate your time, and I am forever grateful for the resources that you unknowingly provided for my husband and I about a year ago. So
You're welcome. And I hope you're telling your listeners that if they would like to watch the original authorized version of Boyhood Shadows,
yeah,
contact us. We're at ISGC of California is how you can find us. Google that, and we will send you free of charge, always free, Boyhood Shadows, the first documentary, full-length documentary on the subject of male sexual victimization, and also glad to send free of charge some of the publications I've published on the subject.
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
Bye.
I will definitely post those in the show notes so that people can access all of the resources that we talked about.
Okay. And you are editing this so we can go off script